quietly celebrate or vocally celebrate in our hearts and our souls another decision by a judge, which is that trans children are not allowed to make gender treatment decisions without parents. The Court of Appeal also says decisions over future treatment could be reviewed by a judge. Common sense at last. Again, let's speak to Helen Joyce, Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters and author of Transgender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. This is really good news, isn't it, Helen? Because essentially what's gone on here is there's a particular young child, a 16-year-old, a girl, who wanted gender reassignment treatment, and her mother really didn't want her to have it. And so it ended up in a court case where the teenager and the child's father had argued that decisions around cross-sex hormone treatment should be left to the child alone. And thankfully, the High Court has said, do you know what? Actually, parental oversight should be allowed. That's really good news, isn't it? The idea that a kid by themselves could say, I'm going to start this treatment. You can't drink alcohol at the age of 15, 16. Why on earth do you reckon children should be able to decide they want puberty blockers? I mean, thank goodness at last this has happened.
It is a significant case, absolutely. And what's really significant about it is that usually at age 16, children become competent to consent to medical treatment. And it's only if there's a reason to think, like, for example, that the child is mentally ill or is not mentally able to understand the issues, that you would turn to the parents to allow the treatment. And in this case, this 16-year-old, she is competent, she is mentally well, she's an intelligent young woman, and so on. And so the previous court said there couldn't be any basis for saying it's not her decision. And the appeal case said that the previous decision was made just after Dr. Hilary Cass's report had come out. And that in that report, it pointed out how there is absolutely no evidence underpinning the treatment pathway that is puberty blockers before 16, cross-sex hormones at 16 or onwards, and actually said that there should be a multidisciplinary case review for every 16 to 18-year-old who wanted to go on cross-sex hormones. So this is part of a long march back to sanity on the treatment of children who don't like being the sex that they actually are. Just another step, there's lots more to go. The mother has to go back to court again. Once the girl reaches 18, she'll be able to make the decision on her own. But basically, she wanted to get the hormones, she wanted to get testosterone from an online clinic, Gender Plus. And Gender Plus isn't set up to do the sort of multidisciplinary assessment that Dr. Hilary Cass said should happen before giving hormones to anybody. So, let's see what it does. What it does is it does a few online consultations and then writes a prescription. It's not anything about the mental health or anything like that. So, yeah, I don't know what the end state will be for this particular child, but it's yet another step in going back to saying that children who don't like being the sex that they are can't just be told they can change sex. It's not possible, and there's no evidence base for the hormone treatment.
How many people in the future do you think are going to end up bringing court cases against doctors, against teachers, saying, I was too young to make this decision. I pursued treatment because at the time I read things on Instagram or whatnot and I thought this is what I wanted to do, but now I've irreversibly damaged my body. Do you reckon there's going to be a scandal in the future akin to, say, I don't know, the infected blood scandal or other medical scandals that we have had, when essentially treatment's been given to young children that was deeply inappropriate?
I mean, it's already happening in America, that's been handing out puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to minors for a lot longer than we have, and a lot more freely. And we're already seeing court cases there on exactly that basis, even though in America it's quite hard to get these cases through if you did say that you consented. I mean, there's even people trying to take cases under consumer fraud, basically false advertising. I was reading a post by a young woman the other day who had taken testosterone and had her breasts removed, and the fact was she was self-harming at the time when she was diagnosed as really being a boy and had her breasts removed. And she said, I was already cutting myself. You helped me to cut deeper. I got shivers when I read that. She's suing at the moment. So yes, this is coming. This is absolutely coming, because there is no evidence that this makes people feel better. And it's definitely bad for their health in all sorts of ways. It has irreversible impacts, including on their fertility.
Do you know, I actually often think this is akin to some of the sort of ghoulish treatments that happened in asylums in the Victorian era, where people were getting lobotomies for PTSD and stuff like that. It is a mental health condition. Even if it's actually genuine dysphoria, it is a psychological condition. Surely one shouldn't treat psychological conditions with surgeries. That, to me, is absolutely mad. Good news that, of course, there's been an indefinite ban on the use of puberty blockers by children wanting to change their gender on the grounds that the drugs pose an unacceptable safety risk. Yet cross-sex hormone treatment, which is what was being sought in this particular case, is not covered by that edict. Should it be the case now that, as a country, we should be looking at whether children can take, cross-sex hormones?
Well, the NHS doesn't give them and hasn't given them under 16, and post-Hilary Cass, basically hardly anyone is going to get them on the NHS between 16 and 18. The issue here was that the child was going to a private provider, and that private provider, what it does is it has an overseas element that does the assessment, and then it refers to a local private provider for the whole hormone prescription. And Dr. Cass said really quite clearly in her report, though it was kind of out of scope because her report was on the NHS, that this was the next thing that needed to be looked at. I hope Wes Streeting, who has shown immense courage and leadership on this issue and has stood fast on the puberty blockers ban, despite all sorts of horrific rhetoric about how he'll be responsible for children killing themselves by grown-ups who really should know better than to say that sort of thing. I hope he now looks at the private provision of hormones to people under 18. Because, actually, do you know what? People under 25, because as Hilary Cass said in her report, our brains don't mature until we're about 25. Young people are very risk-taking. They don't think about their long-term future. They don't think they might want children. They don't think through all the things that they might regret when they're 40, 50, 60.
No, I agree. I often wonder where all of this stuff came from, Helen. I think it's really quite cynical and really quite strange that this wasn't really anything we spoke about 10 years ago, and then it sort of started dominating the news agenda. It became a huge culture war. Culture wars are good. If it wasn't for culture wars, people like they'd still be abusing children with this horrible practice. But what instigated all of this?
Oh, really hard to answer, but I mean, crazy ideas on American campuses and social media is my short version. I mean, kids radicalise each other online, and there's a social contagion here. I mean, one of the striking facts that came out in this court case is the girl who is 16 is living with her father and had a stepmother. And her partner is another girl who identifies as a boy, who's her stepmother's child. So, the two of them have obviously decided together that they're boys. Or at least that would be my guess from the reading between the lines. Obviously, the child is not identified, and that's completely correct. What are the odds? What are the odds that these two girls both had some amazingly rare mental health condition? Isn't it more likely that, they have together made a strange understanding about the world that has been encouraged by social media.
Right, and isn't this the problem here? Because gender dysphoria, which once upon a time only existed in far less than even 1% of the population, it's something like 0.3%, if that, has always predominantly been a male condition. It's why when you get a lot of these, trans rights matters people out on the streets, they tend to be blokes in dresses. It tends to be something that has various overlaps of fetishes, but largely affects men. And yet 3/4 of the young people presenting at gender clinics were girls. Don't we need to have a conversation about young girls in all of this, and why societally lots of young women no longer want to be women?
Oh, completely. I mean, men who identify as women and girls who identify as boys are doing completely different things, and yet they're all rolled up together under the idea that they have a trans identity and they're suffering from gender dysphoria. As you say, for adult men, it's very much associated with a fetish for cross-dressing and a desire to present as a woman for sexual gratification. And in teenage girls, it's part of a cluster of social and mental conditions that are to do with self-harm, eating disorders, autism, wanting to identify out of being a girl because that's a very pornified thing to be, thinking that boys have it easier, that all sorts of things. They're just completely different things, and they're both very socially mediated. So the treatment pathway that was created for men, I don't approve of it. I don't think that we should be giving men estrogen and cutting off body parts and then telling them that they can go out and pretend that they're women and women will go along with it. But at least it was a treatment pathway that was for them. And now this treatment pathway is being used for sad teenage girls.
Yeah, no, it's evil. It is pure evil. Helen, thank you ever so much. Helen Joyce, Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters and author of Transgender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. I've got a little theory, right? So hear me out on this. As Helen was saying, a lot of these young girls, especially, who wind up thinking, I'd much rather be a boy, tend to be influenced by stuff they've seen on social media. And the algorithms then push them into wormholes, especially TikTok, but Instagram as well, push them into wormholes where they get bombarded by this imagery, bombarded by this messaging. And they end up going, yeah, do you know what? I want to go and have top surgery, as it's called, and I want puberty blockers and this, that and the other. I mean, my little theory here is something that's happened in the past sort of 10 years is the cult of Kardashian. And they're famous basically for just being on social media, aren't they? And what do? Do they sing? Do they act? No, they're just things on social media. And when you look at the Kardashians, how many pharmaceutical products are sold off the back of them? All of the lip fillers, the Botox. I mean, they basically are just shilling for, you know, big cosmetic companies, aren't they? And isn't it funny that you got all these Kardashians, all beginning with the letter K, and then what pops up? Oh, the trans dad. And then all of a sudden, on the front of Time magazine or whatever it is. And I'm like, what is going on here? What is the relationship between social media, you know, the dot-com world, Silicon Valley, Big Pharma, and then the Kardashians in the middle? I don't know. I just think it's all sort of interconnected somehow. Right, we're going to take a short